this, but I guess I wanted to first start off by asking, by a show of hands, if there's anyone in the audience who's ever had acupuncture done as a form of treatment. All right. Does anyone know of any others? I'm just trying to get a feel of how popular it is. Okay, so for those of you who may have not heard of acupuncture or are familiar with Chinese medicinal practices, acupuncture is the insertion of small needles in very specific locations in the body with the purpose of affecting and manipulating the flow of these cosmological principles and energies that are present in the world and nature and our bodies. And the very interesting thing about acupuncture is that it was first written about nearly over 2,000 years ago in the period of the Han Dynasty of Chinese culture, which is around 200 BC to 200 AD. And it's in the same period, in fact, in the same medical text that I've been reading for my project, that we begin to see the development of very foundational Chinese cosmological principles like the theory of qi, the theory of 5 phases, and yin-yang, and their correspondence between the cosmological grand scale, the natural world, reasoning structures about how best to govern the people and the state, as well as forces within our own body. So there's this microcosmic, all the way at the very smallest scale, to a macrocosmic view of the world through these cosmological principles. And so I became really interested, since these principles are developing at the same time this practice of acupuncture is beginning to become very popular and utilized as a medicinal practice. What are the kind of systems that they're using to understand their world, and how is it structuring their experience, their practice? So to do this, I needed to figure out find a theoretical lens that would lend itself to understanding why practices develop out of base philosophical or cosmological assumptions. And I wanted to focus on a theory that deals with the body, because obviously any practice any medicinal practice, any healing practice is very much dealing with the body. So that was my purpose in looking for this area. And I found a Western theory proposed by 2 cognitive linguists, George Lakoff and Mark Johnson, who propose a theory of conceptual metaphor. And one of the most important functions of this theory is that we, as a function of our embodied experience, as our experience within a mind, is that we unconsciously utilize concrete domains of experience, like our sense of touch, to reason about abstract or less concrete experiences. So a really great example of this is we often equate understanding a concept or an idea as grasping, literally putting it in our hand and holding it. Another really good example of this, and it's something that shows how it is a theory that arises out of our embodiment, is the feeling of closeness or affection as a warm feeling arises directly out of, it is proposed in this theory that it arises out of our experience as a child, being held by our mother and being held closely, and the feeling of warmth, as well as that kind of loving connection. So this is very important, and what's also necessary in understanding how this relates to medicine is that these concepts aren't just dead systems inside our head that are rattling around. So what is important about them is that they have entailments, they have logical connections that arise out of the acceptance of this, of what happens when you accept a metaphor as corresponding to truth. So I think a really good example of this is using our own Western understanding of medicine, where health is construed as a functioning system, where the body is itself a system that is constituted of many smaller systems that work together to produce a healthy system. And so if this is our understanding of how health operates, when we are sick, when we have an illness, the logical understanding of how you're going to treat this disease is by finding the specific system that is sick, the specific part of the system, and attempting to control or change that part of the system so that it is, again, healthy. Another metaphor that is part and parcel with this functioning system in the West is the body as a machine, the mind as a machine. These are things that we can kind of grasp easily, and are in some respects a little alien to the early Chinese conceptions of health, where it is not so much understood as a functioning physical system. It is more of a functioning harmonious system in between all of these microcosmic and macrocosmic scales. So harmony with one's interpersonal relations, or harmony with one's position in nature, with physical location of your house or your palace. These are the kinds of things that are going to actually have, according to their system, effects on your health. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that both of these systems, both our Western system and the Chinese system, are arising out of our primary desire, our embodied desire to connect the dots in our experience, to try and reason about and understand how we become sick and how we become ill. The difference is the core assumptions or the core theories that are informing these practices. And in China, if you, especially this period, this medical text that I've been reading, if you want to get an understanding of the world that a Chinese person is walking through, you have to get a feeling of two base philosophical ideas. One is the notion of qi, of this psychophysical energy which is intangible but observable through the natural progression of the seasons, and is construed as being the creator and really the mother, to use a metaphor, of all transformations in the world. And when you are trying to talk about qi, the other way that it is often broken up is categorized is into two opposing but transformative categories, yin and yang. And this is also something that you may all be familiar. Yin-yang as a symbol with a big circle and the black and white pieces. There's a little white circle in one and a little black circle in the other. Is a symbolic representation of yin-yang. And we're usually not really involved in understanding just what is in place in this system. So yin-yang is important because yang is construed as this creative, active, engaging process that can also lead to destruction, and yin is the more passive, it is the more relaxed category. But they are never hard, fast, dead categories. They are forever in this transformative, dynamic, fluid motion. So this understanding lends itself really well to observation of the natural world, which is why in this medical text in early Chinese culture, is a very big importance placed upon the yang of the summer, and the height of yang being the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, corresponding to the sun and all this action. Then it begins to, at the height of yang, of the summer solstice, you begin to see yin creep in. Slowly the days get shorter and shorter and shorter. You reach the equinox, they're at a sort of equilibrium, and you can just see how it's a constantly fluid motion. And so, in understanding then how these two systems come together, how these basic philosophical and these basic cosmological principles are informing a Chinese practitioner's techniques, specifically in this, as my example, acupuncture, there has to be a connective thread. There has to be some kind of piece that is going to warrant why you would want to use these theories of cosmological principles to understand the body. And in fact, in the text, I found a passage which I think illustrates this really well. The quote is, "Yin-yang is the web that holds the 10,000 things secure." And this is, I think, really aptly placed to describe this middle ground, because it has in it not even really metaphors as we would consider them. They are really within the sentence itself. You have yin-yang as a web, and this web as a foundation for security. And what I think about with web is that there is these nearly invisible strands of connection which are influencing all of the world and the way that someone is trying to understand their world. And if this sort of web has its security in its interconnectedness, then it would make sense that if you're trying to find a sense of security in a web, you would want to pull your information about the system of health and how your health is being influenced by forces greater than your own in systems that are just as fluid, just as dynamic as your own body. So you would want to look at the motion of the seasons. You would want to understand what is the phase of the moon and how does that correspond to this theory. And in fact, at this period in Chinese culture, any acupuncture that you wish to engage in had to be done at very specific times in the season, phase of the moon, and even physical location, because the feeling was that if the yin and yang of the place, of the cosmos, were not correct, then you could not possibly begin to manipulate the yin and yang of the body. So I'm really excited about this theory. This is a pretty general outline of just some of the, I think, abilities that this theory will have. And I know that Chinese, like I said, Chinese medicine has been written about for over 2,000 years. So the system that is surrounded is incredibly complex, and there are entire other theories and systems that can be used to describe the same body, the same interconnectedness of the body, the nature, and this society. So I would like to continue reading from this text in translation and begin to look at some of the more physical forces that are at play in the body. There's not just qi in the body, there's also a force called blood, which is kind of like our blood but not the same. And there's another force called essence. And as well, going to the cosmological side again, there's also this theory which I spoke about, the theory of 5 phases and 5 elements. And these correspond to natural phenomena, natural elements like wood, fire, earth. And I'd like to try and utilize this theory to try and unpack and analyze just what is at play in the Chinese understanding of medicine and healing, and how it is better informed through these systems. Thank you.